I never expected my attempt to meet new people in this unfamiliar city would lead me down such a dark path. After moving to Millbrook for work, I found myself isolated and desperate for connection. That's when I turned to dating apps, hoping to explore the local scene and maybe find a friendly face. Little did I know I was about to encounter a nightmare disguised as a potential romance. Swiping through profiles, I stumbled upon Raven. Her bio painted a picture of an artistic, free-spirited woman with an interest in nature and alternative lifestyles. After a few exchanges, we agreed to meet for drinks. I offered to pick her up, a decision I'd soon regret. As I pulled up to Raven's apartment complex, an unsettling feeling crept over me. The building looked run down, with peeling paint and overgrown vegetation. Raven emerged from the shadows, her appearance matching her enigmatic online persona. Long dark hair framed a pale face, and her eyes seemed to gleam with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. Our first encounter set off alarm bells I foolishly ignored. When I got out to greet her, Raven's behavior immediately struck me as odd. Instead of walking to the passenger side, she followed me closely to the driver's door, standing uncomfortably near and staring silently. I had to prompt her to get in the other side, which she did by taking an unnecessarily long route around the vehicle. During the drive to Whiskey's, a local bar she'd suggested, Raven spoke in an unnervingly quiet voice. I found myself constantly asking her to repeat herself, straining to catch her words over the hum of the engine and the pounding of my own heart. The air in the car felt thick with tension, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. At the bar, I chose a secluded table, hoping it would help me hear her better and possibly ease my growing anxiety. As we talked, Raven mentioned her recreational drug use, marijuana, mushrooms, and other psychedelics. I relaxed slightly, assuming her strange behavior might be drug-induced. It was a rational explanation, one that allowed me to ignore the warning signs flashing in my mind. Several drinks in, my judgment clouded by alcohol and a desperate need for companionship, I invited Raven back to my place. It was a decision that would haunt me for weeks to come. In my apartment, things took a turn for the bizarre. Raven began talking about her jewelry, claiming it held some great secret that defined her very being. Her voice took on a hypnotic quality as she spoke of ancient bloodlines and hidden truths. Then came the bombshell. She declared herself to be Anastasia, the supposedly murdered Russian princess, miraculously alive after all these years. I made the grave mistake of questioning her claim. Raven exploded in rage, her earlier whispers transforming into ear-splitting screams about disrespect for ancestors and history. In a terrifying moment, she lunged forward, grabbing my neck with surprising strength. She forced me to look into her wild eyes, which seemed to swirl with madness and ancient fury. She proclaimed herself a shaman, threatening to curse me and my oppressive ancestors. To seal her threat, she dipped her hand in my whiskey glass and drew a cross on my face before kissing my forehead. The sting of alcohol on my skin was nothing compared to the chill that ran down my spine. Fear sobering me up, I managed to calm her down by pretending I'd been joking. But Raven wasn't finished with her revelations. She began describing her cat fetish in disturbing detail, even acting out feline behavior in my living room. My instincts screamed danger, but I forced myself to listen quietly, afraid of triggering another outburst. As she crawled across my floor, purring and hissing, I felt like I was trapped in a surreal nightmare. The final straw came when Raven noticed my sage bundle on a shelf. Her eyes lit up with an unsettling gleam as she asked to use it in a blessing ritual. When I refused, explaining it was a personal item, she erupted again. Her face contorted in rage as she screamed that I was a horrible person who deserved to die. She hurled accusations of selfishness and spiritual corruption, her words becoming increasingly incoherent. Before I could react, Raven stormed out of my apartment, slamming the door so hard it rattled the walls. I breathed a sigh of relief, thinking the nightmare was finally over. But my reprieve was short-lived. 10 minutes later, Raven was back, pounding on my door with such force I feared it might break. She demanded her phone, which in her haste to leave she'd left behind. Heart racing, I retrieved the device from my coffee table. When I opened the door to return it, Raven tried to force her way inside. I blocked her with my arm, and she raised her fist as if to strike me. We stood there, frozen in a tableau of tension, neither willing to back down. Finally, Raven lowered her hand, but her eyes burned with hatred. She then demanded the whiskey bottle we'd been drinking from, as if it were some sacred object she couldn't leave behind. I refused, my patience finally exhausted. I slammed the door, throwing the lock into place as Raven's fists pounded against the wood. For what felt like hours, I sat with my back against the door, listening to her rage outside. Her screams and threats eventually faded, replaced by an eerie silence that was almost worse. In the days and weeks that followed, I lived in constant fear. Every time I left my apartment, I obsessively checked my surroundings, half expecting to see Raven lurking in the shadows. Everyday sounds, a car backfiring, a dog barking, made me jump. I changed my routines, avoided my usual haunts, and even considered moving again. Even now, months later, I can't shake the feeling that danger is just around the corner. This experience taught me a harsh lesson about trusting strangers and ignoring red flags. While I hope Raven found the help she clearly needs, a part of me remains on edge, dreading the possibility that our paths might cross again in this city that suddenly feels much smaller and more threatening than before. The incident with Raven has changed me. I'm more cautious now, more aware of the potential dangers lurking behind friendly facades. But I can't help wondering, in a world where connection is increasingly digital, how can we truly know who we're letting into our lives? And in my case, will I ever feel safe again? It is now clear to me how reckless my decision was, but in the moment, I convinced myself that maybe things would turn out differently. I have learned from this experience and want to share what happened. I matched with someone named Alex on a dating app. Our conversations were stiff and awkward, but I chalked it up to first date nerves. We had some common interests that kept me engaged, despite the unusual interactions. One day, Alex suggested that we meet up to watch the new season of a popular show. I wasn't thrilled about the idea of going to his place, but he reassured me that his roommate would be around. That, of course, should have been my first red flag. I arrived at the apartment and noticed right away that Alex's roommate was nowhere in sight. Alex greeted me with a nervous smile and led me into the living room. I sat down on the far end of the couch, hoping to keep a safe distance. Alex settled beside me and we began watching the show. At some point, I noticed that his behavior became increasingly uncomfortable. I glanced over and saw that his pants were down. My stomach dropped as I realized he expected me to sit on his lap. The situation worsened when he made no attempt to conceal his intentions. There was no protection and no consideration for my personal circumstances. He knew I wasn't on birth control due to recent changes in my life and our previous conversations about it. His blatant disregard for my boundaries left me stunned. I abruptly stood up, my mind racing as I tried to process what was happening. Alex called out to me, but I didn't stop. I turned back briefly to see him asking for something completely inappropriate. The shock was overwhelming, and I knew I had to leave. I walked out, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and anger. As I shut the door behind me, I couldn't help but feel a rush of relief. I realized just how dangerous this situation had been, and I was thankful to have escaped unharmed. Reflecting on that night, I now understand more than ever the importance of trusting my instincts and the need to prioritize my safety over any potential connection. It was a hard lesson, but one I won't forget. I had just come out of a relationship and thought casual dating might be fun. I opened an app called Tinder, hoping to meet new people without any pressure. I made it clear to those I matched with that I wasn't looking for anything serious, just a dinner date or a night out now and then. One night, I matched with a guy I'll call Max. He had recently moved to my city and shared my carefree outlook on dating. We decided to meet at a popular tapas bar, a place where I felt safe because I had friends who worked there. When he arrived, I was relieved to find he seemed nice. We chatted about our lives, and he mentioned he was a software developer who had just started freelancing. I shared that my one-bedroom apartment in a popular part of town was made possible by my parents' help with my deposit. At the end of the night, Max offered to drop me off at home, but I declined, saying I preferred to take an Uber. He jokingly asked if I had plans to meet someone else. I laughed it off, not thinking much of it. 3 days later, Max texted me again. He said he couldn't stop thinking about me and wanted to see me again. We met at another restaurant, one I had chosen because I knew the owner and felt comfortable there. I ordered a lot of food and he seemed annoyed, which confused me since I offered to pay for my meal. Once again, he insisted on driving me home. I hesitated but eventually agreed. He was eager to see me again the next day, suggesting a picnic. I told him I had chores to do, but he insisted he would pick me up at 10 in the morning. The next day he was waiting outside my apartment. As he leaned over to greet me, I noticed his breath had a strong odor. It was off-putting, but I tried to ignore it. The picnic was pleasant enough, but he attempted to kiss me several times, and I avoided it each time. By late afternoon, I wanted to go home. The park was too far for me to take an Uber, so I asked him to drive me back. I fell asleep during the ride, and when I woke up, he asked if I wanted to finish the bubbly we bought for mimosas back at my apartment. I politely declined, but this seemed to trigger something in him. He raised his voice, accusing me of hiding something and questioning why I didn't want him at my place. I was stunned into silence. After he dropped me off, I noticed his car parked across the street for a while before he left. Shortly after, I received a message from him saying he made it home safe and thought he was starting to develop feelings for me. I felt alarmed. I had been clear about wanting to keep things casual, and it was time for a break from seeing each other. 5 days later, he reached out again, suggesting dinner at an Indian restaurant he thought I'd enjoy. I agreed, but told him to send me the address. He insisted on picking me up again, and when I went downstairs, he stood by my gate, waiting for me. To my discomfort, he entered my yard without asking and asked to see my apartment. I told him I was hungry and suggested we go to dinner first, promising to show him my place later. During dinner, he received another call. This time, he didn't step away. He talked about picking up his belongings from somewhere, and I heard snippets that hinted at trouble. My heart raced. I glanced at him, trying to gauge if this was something serious. I was terrified of where this was headed. He asked if he could sleep over after dinner, and I felt my stomach drop. I firmly rejected his request, stating I had work in the morning. He seemed annoyed but masked it. When I insisted I didn't like having strangers in my apartment, he looked hurt. Once we finished eating, I paid for myself and he did the same. I planned to take an Uber home, but he insisted on dropping me off again. Reluctantly, I got into his car, and as I reached for my jacket in the back seat, I spotted a bag filled with clothes and toiletries. My sister's car was always a mess, so I didn't think much of it. On the drive home, the air grew tense. He suddenly accused me of being selfish, saying he had no issue driving me around, but I wouldn't let him stay at my place. I tried to defuse the situation, suggesting I could pay him what my Uber fares would cost, but he just got angrier. His phone rang again, and the voice on the other end sounded furious. I realized it must be someone from his past, perhaps an ex. A knot formed in my stomach. Before I could process it, he exploded, screaming at me about being a spoiled brat, and his words stung like knives. I felt trapped. My mind raced as I planned my escape. I needed to get out of the car the second he stopped. I could run to the cafe beneath my apartment, where I could access a secure back entrance. When we finally arrived at my place, I jumped out and sprinted toward the cafe. I dashed through the entrance, ran to the back, and hurried upstairs. I knocked frantically on my neighbor's door, gasping for breath as I explained what had happened. They let me in and agreed to call the cafe to explain my frantic run. I blocked Max's number and didn't look back. I pieced together the events that unfolded. He was likely homeless and had wanted to stay with me. The calls from the woman were still a mystery. Perhaps he had been using Tinder to find a place to crash. All I knew was that the encounter terrified me, and I hoped I would never see him again. It feels like a lifetime ago, but I still remember it vividly. After ending a difficult relationship in early 2019, I decided to explore the dating scene. I joined an app called Tinder, thinking I could meet someone new and exciting. I came across a guy named Ryan. He was charming and attractive, and our conversations flowed easily. It seemed too good to be true. Eventually, I took a ride to his neighborhood. I learned that he had moved back in with his mother after his father had passed away. I found that thoughtful, so I felt comfortable. We went to a grocery store to grab some snacks and a bottle of wine for his mom. I bought a pizza to cook for dinner, hoping to make a good impression. His mother was welcoming and friendly, and their house was stunning. There was a vintage jukebox in the corner and unique sinks that had faucets built into the mirrors. It felt like stepping into a different time. Ryan and I drank and spent time together. Things escalated, and we ended up in his bedroom. I shared my struggles with mental health, including my past with self-harm. I showed him my scars, thinking honesty would strengthen our connection. He seemed understanding and supportive. The next day, I had an important interview at a major company. Ryan's mom even offered to drive me there, which felt so kind. I aced the interview and received a job offer, and I couldn't wait to share the good news with Ryan. Then everything took a dark turn. One afternoon, after waking from a deep sleep, I found my phone flooded with messages from him, more than I could count. At first they were casual, but as I scrolled down, the tone changed drastically. One message caught my attention, expressing disdain for my past with self-harm. My stomach sank. I felt a rush of anger and fear. I blocked him immediately and posted a warning on my social media. I needed to let others know who he really was. Soon after, I received a friend request from a girl named Sarah, who introduced herself as Ryan's best friend. As she shared her story, my heart sank further. She wasn't a lesbian. She had just broken up with him hours before contacting me. He had told her I was a lesbian. Sarah revealed that Ryan had been stalking her, monitoring her phone and sending her disturbing messages. I felt a chill run down my spine. He had lied about everything. I quickly realized that I had been a pawn in his twisted game. Sarah showed me screenshots of the messages Ryan had sent her. The anger in his words, the manipulation, the aggression. It was alarming. I offered to share my own messages with her to help build a case against him. We connected over our shared experiences, and it became clear that something was very wrong with him. Then I got another friend request from someone I didn't recognize. The name was generic, Mike. I hesitated before opening the message. It mentioned my job. He knew where I worked. I had to act quickly. I called my dad, who had been in law enforcement for decades. He advised me to stay cautious. He said pepper spray was a good choice for self-defense, and I shouldn't carry anything that could be taken from me and used against me. The parking lot of my workplace was usually quiet late at night when my shift ended. I felt vulnerable as I parked my car as close to the entrance as possible, pepper spray in hand. I had never felt so scared in my life. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, and every sound made my heart race. I scanned the area, feeling the weight of fear settle on my chest. For weeks I kept my guard up. I changed my routines and stayed alert. I avoided social media and limited my interactions with anyone connected to Ryan. I didn't want to risk any unwanted contact. He seemed to have a way of creeping into every aspect of my life. One night, as I left work, I felt an unease wash over me. My instincts told me to hurry to my car. I fumbled with my keys, desperately wishing I could get inside and lock the door behind me. The air felt thick with tension. Just as I opened my car door, I saw a figure in the distance. My heart raced as I recognized him. Ryan stood at the edge of the parking lot, his posture tense and his eyes locked on me. I couldn't breathe. Panic surged through my veins. I remembered my dad's advice and reached for the pepper spray, ready to defend myself. But just as quickly as he appeared, Ryan turned and walked away. I scrambled into my car and locked the doors, my hands trembling. I reported the incident to my dad, who urged me to file a report with the police. I hesitated, unsure if they would take me seriously. But after everything, I couldn't risk staying silent. I documented every interaction, every message, every moment of fear he caused me. Eventually, I moved to a new apartment and changed jobs. It felt like a fresh start, but the shadows of my past lingered. I couldn't shake the feeling that Ryan was still out there, watching and waiting. If anything had taught me, it was that some connections come with hidden dangers. What seemed perfect on the surface often hid darkness beneath. As I settled into my new life, I held on to the lesson I learned. If it feels too good to be true, it probably is. Had just come out of a long relationship, one that lasted nearly 4 years with a girl I thought I would spend my life with. We had been close to getting engaged and moving in together. When it ended, I needed time to focus on myself and get my life back on track. My friends, however, began pushing me to get back out there. I wasn't interested in dating at all, but their constant encouragement made me feel like I should at least try to meet new people. They thought it would help me stop being such a hermit. One day, I matched with a girl named Maya. She was home for the summer from college and was eager to meet me. She lived quite a distance away, but her excitement was clear. I was hesitant because I wasn't looking for anything serious, but my friends insisted it would be good practice. A casual lunch couldn't hurt, right? I made it clear to Maya that I wasn't seeking a serious relationship. I had just gotten out of something significant and was only exploring the dating scene. Still, she seemed keen to meet. We decided to have lunch at a local sports bar. When I arrived, Maya was already there. I couldn't help but notice she looked quite different from her photos. Her pictures had to be at least 5 years old. I recognized tattoos in person that weren't in the photos, which threw me off a bit. I wasn't attracted to her, but I was willing to give it a shot since my goal was to have new experiences. The lunch started off awkwardly. Maya seemed incredibly shy, and I could see her hand shaking when she reached for her drink. I tried my best to engage her in conversation, asking about her hometown, her major, and what music she liked. Each time I was met with one-word answers. After an hour of this, I realized it wasn't going anywhere. I felt bad for her, understanding how anxiety could impact someone. Then, out of nowhere, she pulled out a book and handed it to me. I was surprised. She said she got it for me, and I was curious about its contents. When I asked what it was about, she looked at me in disbelief. She insisted it was my favorite book, which I had never heard of before. We figured she must have mixed me up with someone else, and I couldn't help but find humor in the situation. As we finished lunch, I suggested that I needed to get back home to feed my pets and do some laundry. To my surprise, Maya insisted on spending more time together. I didn't want to be rude, so I agreed, and we found a nearby park to walk. Once we sat on a bench, everything changed. It was broad daylight with kids playing nearby and joggers passing by. I tried to make conversation again, but the one-word answers continued. Suddenly, without any warning, she leaned in and kissed me aggressively. I froze in shock, completely caught off guard. This was not the shy person I had been talking to just moments before. It felt like my mind was spinning, and I prayed for it to stop. I didn't know how to react or what to do. As if that wasn't enough, a loud guy walked by, making crude comments and suggesting something inappropriate. I was taken aback by the whole scene. I managed to tell him to leave us alone while Maya just laughed at the absurdity of it all. I was bewildered, wondering who this person was and what had just happened. Once the guy left, I felt a rush of relief, but Maya leaned in closer, asking if I liked the kiss and if I found her attractive. I was filled with anxiety, wanting to get out of there. I told her I needed to go home. When she asked if she could come with me, I firmly said no. She didn't seem to take my rejection seriously and tried to persuade me to let her come over. After telling her no multiple times, I finally escaped and made my way home, shaken and confused. Once home, I felt uneasy. I hadn't been on a date in a long time, but this felt completely abnormal. To my surprise, Maya texted me after she got home, asking for a second date. I was polite but honest, telling her I didn't feel a connection and reminded her that I wasn't looking for anything serious. What happened next was unexpected. She bombarded me with messages filled with confusion and frustration, insisting that she thought we had a great time. I didn't respond, respecting my own boundaries. I assumed she would eventually stop, but the texts kept coming. It felt as if we had just ended a long relationship rather than a first date. Then she started calling me. That was the final straw. I had to block her number, feeling relieved but still unsettled. This was a strange world of dating I had stepped into. For the sake of my sanity, I hoped I would never encounter her again.